March 2022. Somewhere over the Norwegian Sea, an airliner's GPS readout freezes for exactly 4 seconds. At the same instant, a cargo ship approaching Rotterdam loses its position fix. A telecom tower outside Amsterdam logs a timing error in its network clock. 3 systems, 3 industries, 0 shared cables, 0 shared software, 0 reason to fail together. And yet, for 4 seconds, they all broke in the same way, at the same moment, across more than 1,000 kilometers of open sky. This wasn't a one-time glitch. By the time researchers finished digging through years of monitoring data, they'd found dozens of these events and traced them not to a transmitter on the ground, but to a satellite quietly circling 200 kilometers above Earth, as part of a military constellation most people have never heard of. This is the story of how a 5-second mystery in GPS data exposed one of the biggest blind spots in modern navigation. The first reports were easy to dismiss. GPS receivers across Northern Europe would occasionally drop signal for 3 to 5 seconds, then snap right back to normal. No crashes, no permanent damage, just a brief, clean dropout that left almost no trace. Engineers initially blamed the usual suspects: a faulty antenna, a nearby construction site, maybe a poorly shielded radio transmitter leaking into GPS frequencies. Ground-based interference like this is common, and it's almost always local, a few city blocks, maybe a few dozen kilometers at most. But these dropouts weren't local. Stations separated by hundreds, sometimes thousands of kilometers, were recording the exact same disruption at the exact same second. A jammer sitting in a basement in Oslo cannot simultaneously knock out a receiver in the Netherlands. The geometry didn't work. Something else was happening. That's when Professor Todd Humphreys and his research team at the University of Texas decided to stop treating these events as noise and start treating them as data. They pulled years of archived GPS monitoring records, going all the way back to 2019, and began searching for the pattern hiding underneath the static. To understand why this mystery mattered, it helps to understand just how fragile GPS actually is. Every GPS satellite orbits roughly 20,000 kilometers above Earth, broadcasting a continuous signal that tells receivers 2 things: exactly where the satellite is and exactly what time it is, down to billionths of a second. Your phone, your car, your bank's transaction servers, they all listen to at least 4 of these satellites at once and use the tiny differences in signal arrival time to calculate your precise location and the precise current time. The problem is the signal strength. By the time a GPS broadcast travels 20,000 kilometers and reaches your receiver, it's incredibly weak, often compared to a single light bulb's worth of power spread across half a planet. Your receiver is straining to hear a whisper. That weakness is exactly what makes GPS so easy to disrupt. A transmission that's even slightly stronger on the same frequency doesn't need to hack anything or break any encryption. It simply drowns the real signal out, the same way a shout overwhelms a whisper in a quiet room. This is called jamming, and it's been a known vulnerability in satellite navigation for decades. Most jamming is small-scale and ground-based: a truck driver blocking a company tracker, a drone operator avoiding detection, a military unit protecting a convoy. The disruptions Humphreys' team found broke that pattern entirely. They were too brief, too synchronized, and too widespread to come from the ground. Whatever was drowning out these signals wasn't standing next to the receivers, it was flying over them. Before pointing to anything in orbit, the team had to eliminate every earthly explanation first. Solar activity was an obvious early candidate. Powerful solar flares and geomagnetic storms genuinely can disturb GPS signals, sometimes across entire continents. But solar interference behaves differently. It builds and fades gradually over minutes or hours, and it doesn't selectively target a handful of receiver stations while leaving others untouched. These events did. Solar activity logs for the dates in question showed nothing unusual. Ground-based jamming was ruled out next, for the same reason it was suspicious in the first place. The affected stations were simply too far apart, and the timing was too perfectly synchronized for any terrestrial transmitter to account for it. There was also a pattern in the timing itself that stood out. These disruptions weren't randomly scattered throughout the day or night. They clustered heavily during European business hours, the kind of schedule you'd expect from a controlled test, not a natural phenomenon or random technical fault. Lightning storms and solar weather don't observe office hours. Whatever was generating this interference appeared to be doing so on a schedule, intentionally. With the ground and the sun eliminated, the only remaining direction was up. This is where the investigation shifted from puzzle solving to detective work. Humphreys' team pulled raw radio frequency data from monitoring stations in Norway and the Netherlands, recordings detailed enough to capture the interference signal itself, not just its effect on GPS receivers. By comparing the exact arrival time of the disruption at each station, down to fractions of a second, they could work backward and calculate where in the sky the signal had to be coming from at that precise moment. It's the same basic principle used to locate a lightning strike from the timing of thunder at different listening posts, just applied to objects moving in orbit instead of standing still on the ground. Once you know two stations heard the same signal at two slightly different times, you can draw a line through the sky toward the source. When the team ran the numbers, the line pointed to a specific satellite, Cosmos 2546. Cosmos 2546 isn't a commercial or scientific satellite. It belongs to Russia's Missile Early Warning Satellite Network, a constellation designed to detect missile launches from orbit, built and operated by the country's military. That's what makes this discovery uncomfortable rather than purely academic. A satellite belonging to a missile warning system has no obvious reason to be broadcasting brief, scheduled bursts of interference on frequencies used by GPS and other global navigation systems. And yet the data, traced independently from two separate ground stations, hundreds of kilometers apart, kept pointing back to the same spacecraft. The researchers were careful about how far the evidence could responsibly take them. They could not see inside the satellite, read its onboard systems, or confirm intent. What they could say is narrower, but still significant. Signals consistent with the source, location, and orbit of Cosmos 2546 lined up precisely with years of recorded GPS disruptions across Europe. With a likely source identified, the question shifted from what to why. Two explanations have emerged as the leading candidates. The first is that this is a test. A space-based jamming capability would let a military disrupt GPS-reliant systems, aircraft, ships, guided weapons, vehicle fleets over enormous areas, instantly, without placing a single jammer on the ground. Testing that capability quietly, in short bursts, over years, would let engineers measure its real-world range and effectiveness, without ever drawing public attention, until someone went looking specifically for the pattern. The second possibility is less dramatic but still significant. The satellite could be transmitting secure military communications on frequencies positioned close enough to GPS to bleed into it as an unintended side effect. In that scenario, the disruption isn't the goal, it's collateral noise from something else entirely. Both explanations lead to the same uncomfortable bottom line. Whether by design or as a byproduct, a single satellite in this constellation appears capable of disrupting navigation signals across an area spanning thousands of kilometers. Intent matters for diplomacy. For infrastructure, capability is what counts, and the capability is now demonstrated, on the record, repeatedly, since at least 2019. It's easy to think of GPS as something that just lives inside a phone app, quietly drawing a blue dot on a map. In reality, satellite navigation has become one of the load-bearing pillars of modern civilization, and most of that role is invisible until it stops working. Commercial aircraft rely on GPS for navigation and approach guidance. Cargo ships use it to cross oceans on the most efficient routes. Financial networks, time-stamped transactions using GPS-derived clocks accurate to the microsecond, a requirement for keeping global markets synchronized. Cellular networks and power grids both depend on GPS timing signals to keep their systems coordinated across entire regions. Even something as ordinary as a food delivery app or a rideshare pickup depends on a chain of GPS infrastructure most users will never think about. A disruption lasting 3 to 5 seconds barely registers in daily life. But the same demonstrated capability, scaled up in duration or deployed deliberately during a crisis, could ripple through aviation safety systems, maritime navigation, and financial infrastructure simultaneously across an entire continent. This is precisely why a growing number of researchers, including Humphreys' team, argue for redundancy rather than reliance. Backup systems like fiber optic timing networks, which distribute precise time over physical cables instead of satellite signals, and terrestrial radio navigation systems, which broadcast from ground transmitters that are far harder to disrupt from orbit, offer a way to keep critical infrastructure running, even if satellite navigation goes dark. Several countries have already begun reviving or investing in exactly these kinds of backup systems, treating GPS not as an unbreakable foundation, but as one layer in a system that needs a fallback. What started as a handful of unexplained seconds in a GPS log turned into a years-long investigation that ended up pointing at a foreign military satellite constellation, quietly testing or quietly using a capability that most of the world didn't know existed. No alarms went off, no outages made headlines. The disruption never lasted long enough for most people to even notice. That's exactly what makes this story unsettling. The vulnerability isn't hypothetical, isn't theoretical, and isn't waiting to be discovered in some future conflict. It's already been demonstrated, repeatedly, in real time, over one of the most developed regions on Earth, and almost nobody knew it was happening until researchers went looking for it. If this is the kind of investigation you want, more of real research, real data, real implications, no exaggeration required, make sure you're subscribed, because this channel exists to track stories exactly like this one before they make mainstream headlines. Drop a comment below. If a single satellite can quietly interrupt navigation systems across an entire continent, what do you think that means for the next decade of orbital security? I read every comment, and the best ones often shape what gets investigated next. Thanks for watching.